What if I told you the most terrifying Roman weapon wasn't the sword, the siege engine, or even their legions themselves? What if I told you it was a single javelin, a spear so cleverly designed that it could destroy shields, break enemy formations, and crush morale before a battle had even begun? This was the pilum, the unassuming Roman throwing spear that helped build an empire. And today, we're going to uncover why armies across the ancient world feared it more than any other weapon in Rome's arsenal. When we think of Rome's military power, we often imagine disciplined legionaries with their shining helmets, their rectangular shields, and the iconic short sword, the gladius. But here's the thing: before those legionaries even closed the distance with their enemies, they had already won half the battle. How? By using the pilum. The pilum was not just a weapon. It was a calculated piece of military engineering, part of a system designed to break the enemy, both physically and psychologically. The central question we'll explore today is this: how did a single throwing spear, something so simple, become the weapon that terrified the ancient world? Over the next half hour, we'll dive deep into this story. First, we'll explore the genius behind the pilum's design. Then, we'll see how it functioned on the battlefield and why it was so effective. We'll uncover the psychological terror it instilled in Rome's enemies. And finally, we'll look at the legacy it left behind long after the last Roman legionary hurled one across a battlefield. By the end, you'll understand why the pilum deserves as much fame as any sword, siege engine, or war elephant in history. When we think of Rome's military might, we often picture the gladius, the short stabbing sword of the legionary. Yet, before a Roman soldier even drew his blade, his enemies had already been softened, broken, and terrorized by another weapon entirely: the pilum. This was no ordinary spear, no crude javelin hurled in desperation. The pilum was a weapon of precision and calculation, a tool engineered to dismantle enemy defenses before the clash of hand-to-hand combat even began. Its presence on the battlefield was a harbinger of defeat for Rome's enemies, for they knew that once the pila rained down, their shields would splinter, their formations would falter, and the iron discipline of the legions would come crashing forward. A pilum was typically around 7 feet long, its shaft made of sturdy wood, but it was the iron shank, thin, elongated, and often nearly 3 feet in length, that gave it its terrifying qualities. Topped with a sharp pyramidal point, it was designed not just to pierce but to ruin. When a legionary hurled his pilum, it flew with weight and momentum, embedding itself into shields or armor. But unlike other javelins, it didn't simply lodge and hold. Instead, the iron was soft enough to bend upon impact. Once bent, it rendered the enemy's shield nearly useless, cumbersome, dragging, and impossible to wield effectively. Soldiers were faced with a cruel choice: abandon their shield and fight exposed, or remain encumbered and slow, doomed to fall beneath the Roman advance. The terror of the pilum wasn't simply its ability to wound, it was its ability to break the spirit of Rome's opponents. In the heat of battle, when ranks of barbarians or phalanxes of Greeks raised their shields high, the whistling storm of pila tore through their confidence. Shields became dead weight, spears splintered under the chaos, and formations dissolved in the panic of sudden vulnerability. Rome's soldiers understood this advantage well. Every throw of the pilum was not just an attack, but a strike at the very cohesion of the enemy. This calculated destruction set the Romans apart. They did not rely solely on brute strength, but on engineered terror. The pilum was proof that Rome's power was as much about psychology as it was about steel. To face the legion was to face not only soldiers, but weapons designed with cunning foresight, weapons that promised to spare before the first sword was even drawn. The brilliance of the pilum lay not only in its use, but in its construction. Rome was a civilization that prided itself on engineering, whether in aqueducts, roads, or siege machines, and the pilum was yet another example of this genius applied to war. It looked deceptively simple: a wooden shaft, a slender iron shank, and a pyramidal head. Yet, every inch of it had been designed with purpose. Unlike the rigid spears of other cultures, the pilum's iron was deliberately made to be malleable. This was not a flaw, but a deliberate innovation. The pyramidal point was designed to punch through enemy shields, often piercing armor and flesh behind it. Once it lodged, the thin iron shank would bend under the stress of impact. Why bend? Because a bent pilum could not be removed cleanly, nor could it be thrown back. Imagine a Gallic warrior lifting his heavy shield, only to feel the weight of the pilum sink deep into it. He tries to yank it free, but the iron has bent, twisting through wood and leather, dragging the shield down, making it awkward and heavy. In the chaos of battle, there is no time to cut away the weapon. That soldier must now discard the shield entirely, standing defenseless in the face of the advancing legionaries. Some piler even had barbed or socketed heads to further increase the difficulty of removal, ensuring that once a shield was struck, it was essentially ruined. Others were weighted to give the throw additional penetrating force. Roman quartermasters ensured that each legionary carried 2 piler, one heavy, one light, so that they could be used in sequence depending on the needs of the engagement. What this shows is that the Romans never left warfare to chance. Every weapon they carried was not just for attack, but for strategy. The pilum neutralized enemy defenses before the real fight began. It was the first phase of an orchestrated dance of destruction, piler to cripple, gladii to kill. This combination reflected the Roman philosophy of war, an almost industrial process of breaking opponents methodically, step by step, until resistance collapsed. The pilum was not the weapon of a reckless warrior. It was the weapon of an empire that engineered its victories as carefully as it engineered its monuments. To hold one was to hold in your hand a perfect union of metal and mind, designed not for show, but for conquest. The Roman battlefield was a place of order, discipline, and ruthless calculation. When 2 armies met, the legions did not charge wildly. They advanced with precision, shields interlocked, and pillar at the ready. The pilum was not a weapon of last resort, nor was it simply a projectile hurled for convenience. It was an integral part of Rome's battle doctrine, carefully woven into the sequence of combat. As the enemy closed in, legionaries would raise their pila and, at the centurion's command, unleash them in volleys. The air filled with the hiss and whistle of hundreds of iron-tipped javelins arsing toward their targets. For those on the receiving end, the experience was nothing short of devastating. Shields became liabilities, soldiers were forced to abandon them, and formations dissolved in the confusion. This was precisely what Rome intended. By disrupting the enemy's cohesion in the moments before close combat, the legions ensured that when they drew their gladii and charged, they were not meeting a disciplined wall of resistance, but a broken mass of disoriented fighters. Consider the effectiveness of this system. The enemy, already forced to deal with the weight and chaos of incoming pila, now faced the brutal advance of soldiers wielding short swords designed for stabbing in tight formation. With their shields compromised and their ranks scattered, their ability to mount an effective counterattack was nearly impossible. The pilum had done its work before a single Roman blade had struck home. This was not just a tactical advantage, it was a philosophy of warfare. Rome did not win by brute force alone. It won by creating conditions where its enemies had already lost the battle before the true fight even began. The pilum was the tool that made this possible. The legionary himself was trained to see the pilum as part of his arsenal, not a throwaway weapon. Each soldier carried at least 2, and he understood their role in the choreography of battle. First, the disabling volley, then the close, quarter slaughter. This sequence was drilled endlessly, ensuring that when the time came, the legion fought as one machine, its components moving with deadly precision. The pilum was, therefore, more than a javelin. It was the herald of Roman victory, the first act in a carefully orchestrated drama of conquest. It gave the legions their edge, ensuring that time and again, Rome could face enemies larger in number or fiercer in spirit, and still emerge triumphant. The most terrifying thing about the pilum was not merely its ability to pierce a shield, nor even its ability to wound. It was the way it struck at the minds of Rome's enemies. Warfare has always been as much about morale as about blood, and the Romans understood this with chilling clarity. The pilum was, at its core, a weapon of psychological dominance. Imagine standing in a line of warriors, shield raised, waiting for the clash. The enemy is advancing, their formation steady, their discipline unbroken. You know that in moments, you will be engaged in the brutal struggle of hand-to-hand combat. Then, before that clash, a command is shouted from the Roman ranks, and suddenly the sky darkens with a storm of iron. The pillar come whistling down, slamming into shields, bending, twisting, making them unwieldy. Some pierce through, injuring comrades beside you. Others weigh your shield down so heavily you cannot hold it upright. In seconds, the protection you trusted is gone. Panic spreads. You look left and right and see men discarding their shields, leaving themselves exposed. Confidence crumbles before the Romans have even reached you. This is the genius of the pilum. It robbed the enemy not only of their defenses, but of their certainty. Soldiers fight best when they feel secure behind their armor and their shields. Take that away, and they become vulnerable in spirit as well as in body. The Romans created a weapon that delivered not just physical damage, but fear. Even the reputation of the pilum served Rome. News of its effectiveness spread across regions. Enemies who had never faced the legions firsthand still heard of the terrible javelin that rendered shields useless and shattered formations. In this way, the pilum became a kind of myth, a weapon whispered about before battles even began. Armies approached the Romans already half defeated, their minds filled with images of iron raining from the sky. Rome understood that victory was not simply about killing enemies. It was about making them believe they could not win. The pilum, with its cruel ingenuity, achieved this perfectly. It ensured that the enemy fought in fear, demoralized, and often in disarray before the clash of swords. In this sense, it was not just a weapon, but a psychological instrument, crafted to break both shield and spirit in equal measure. The pilum story stretches beyond its use in Rome's golden age of conquest. It became a weapon that defined the way Rome fought, and for centuries, it struck terror into all who opposed the legions. From the dense forests of Germania to the windswept plains of Gaul, from the deserts of North Africa to the misty fields of Britannia, enemies came to know the telltale sign of Pila raised high, and the devastation that would follow. Against the Carthaginians, the pilum was used to deadly effect, helping to neutralize Hannibal's forces even after his early victories. In Gaul, the weapon proved invaluable against large, fierce tribal armies who relied on sheer numbers and the weight of their charges. A storm of pila could reduce their momentum to chaos, leaving them vulnerable to Rome's relentless advance. Even the mighty Macedonian phalanx, with its bristling wall of sarissas, found itself undone by the pilum. The long spears of the phalanx were formidable in tight formation, but once pila disrupted their shields and scattered their cohesion, the phalanx became vulnerable to close assault. What makes the legacy of the pilum so striking is not only how effective it was, but how singular it was. Other cultures had javelins, spears, and darts, yet none had developed a weapon quite like the pilum. One that was both disposable and decisive, both simple in form and devastating in function. It was a uniquely Roman creation, embodying the empire's philosophy of calculated, methodical warfare. Over time, as Rome evolved and its enemies changed, the pilum eventually faded from use. By the late empire, different weapons and tactics took its place, reflecting the shifting nature of warfare. But its impact lingered in memory. To later generations, the pilum symbolized the ingenuity and dominance of the Roman way of war. It was remembered not simply as a javelin, but as the weapon that helped Rome carve an empire across 3 continents, a weapon that reduced countless enemies to ruin before a blade had even been drawn. So, what made the pilum the weapon that terrified the world? It wasn't just the iron tip or the wooden shaft. It was the genius of its design, the way it turned shields into burdens. It was its role on the battlefield, breaking formations before the real fight began. It was the psychological terror it inspired, stripping soldiers of their courage before the Romans even reached them. And it was its legacy, a weapon remembered not for glory, but for how effectively it paved the way for Rome's domination. The pilum reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying weapon isn't the biggest or the flashiest. It's the one that quietly, methodically, and inevitably ensures victory. If you found this journey into Rome's secret weapon fascinating, make sure to like this video and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode, and tell me in the comments, if you were standing across from a Roman legion, pila raised and ready to fly, what would you do?